Take your career to the next level. The University of South Florida, St. Petersburg is offering a master's degree in digital journalism and design. Do the entire program from home and complete it in as little as 1 year. For more information, email journalism@usf.edu or call 727-873-4544. The cost is reasonable. The experience is invaluable. From the worldwide leader in journalism, truth, and democracy, this is the Poynter Report Podcast, a joint production between the Poynter Institute and the Department of Journalism and Digital Communication at the University of South Florida, St. Petersburg. Now here's your host from the Poynter Institute, Tom Jones.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Welcome in. Every few episodes here on the Poynter Report Podcast, we like to do a sort of a vibe check on the media, sort of the state of the media, talk about the topics du jour, as it were. What are we talking about here in media? And nobody better to help us do that today in this episode than Jeremy Barr, media reporter at The Guardian, formerly of The Washington Post and several other places. But he has a new job at The Guardian. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but first let me welcome in Jeremy Barr. Jeremy, thanks so much for doing this, man.
Sure, happy to. Anytime.
I feel like I have to do this every episode now. We're recording this on October 16th. I think it's important to say when we're recording it because we're running into this cycle now where not only is the media news changing like by the day, it's almost by the hour at times. We recently did one with Chuck Todd, and we were talking, and like within a couple of days after we recorded it, Jimmy Kimmel show got booted off the air for a few days. And so it wasn't on the podcast. People were like, why do you talk about Jimmy Kimmel? I'm like, these things are happening so fast. So we're recording this on October 16th. And we're going to start off hopefully with a subject that's a little bit evergreen. And that's Bari Weiss taking over as editor-in-chief at CBS News. And Jeremy, I wanted to ask you about, I think most people who watch or listen to this podcast know who Bari Weiss is. She was at the New York Times, opinion writer, left under not the best circumstances. She kind of went scorched earth when she left. Started her own thing, the Free Press, which has been quite successful. And now she takes over as editor-in-chief of CBS News. When I first heard that Larry Ellison, who now is the owner of the parent company of CBS, was considering bringing her in, I didn't doubt the reporting, but I was surprised. What was your reaction when you first heard for the first time, like, hey, CBS might be bringing in Bari Weiss as editor-in-chief?
Yeah. I mean, I think it was surprising in the sense that she's not a TV person. And I have been told in my 11 years covering media that TV is a very specialized industry and you have to know how it works. And you can't sort of just like come in from a different industry and try to sort of take over a network. And, a lot of entrenched folks and people behind the scenes. And it seemed like an obvious situation where she would encounter resistance from people that were skeptical of her. Obviously she's been very successful in building the Free Press. I think they have about $15 million in annualized revenue. So a successful small business, but CBS obviously a massive enterprise. I just think she was not one of the names that you would consider. But there are some people, perhaps people like Dylan Byers, I would say, who think that you need to shake things up and pick people that are like totally out of left field, and that actually you're wrong if you think they should pick the traditional candidates,
right?
Because the people that are focused on talking about the secular decline of the industry, they say that like the problem is that everyone keeps picking the same people, and it's true that CBS has people from ABC. Tom Sobrowski was at ABC. Every network has people from other broadcast networks. And there's little crews of different former people at different networks. So I think that for the people that believe in kind of like the blow it up model, it made more sense than the people who believed in the kind of like, let's make incremental changes. But it also was not totally unclear whether bringing in a new editor-in-chief, how much that really will change or what will change about it. I don't think a new editor-in-chief necessarily at any network can totally reverse whatever the viewership trends are. I actually don't know if the average person knows Bari Weiss. I mean, I would be curious to do like put a poll out in the field about whether people know Bari Weiss and would actually want to watch CBS News because of Bari Weiss. That very well could be true, but I just don't have a general sense as a media reporter of whether that's an addition that will excite part of the viewer base, because they obviously would love to get, a few more million people listening or watching the evening news at night. And I guess the hope is that she will shake things up a bit and bring on some new guests and some new formats, undo some things that have been bad, and then maybe bring about some new buzz that could lead to new viewers. But I think that, if you've been watching World News Tonight for 15 years, the odds of you switching are very low, which has been interesting. So in the last, 6-7 years, that people as networks have been trying to promote new formats, new anchors, new everything. My question is always, will it actually move viewers? I grew up in a household that watched the nightly news.
Right.
And there was literally no chance you can get my parents to watch the other networks, because they had a relationship with Brokaw and Brian Williams and Lester Holt, and they just were not interested in what's happening on CBS or ABC. And so, but also, of course, one of the issues is that the average viewers for all these shows is older. And so those viewers are already not particularly valuable to advertisers. And so if you're trying to get more older viewers, that might be great to pad your numbers, but it doesn't mean you're making more money necessarily. So it seems like part of the hope, and I think that's maybe part of the hope across the whole industry, is bringing in younger people, and seeing if they can shake things up and maybe attract more other younger people.
Right.
So young people don't generally watch broadcast news or like to pay for things besides Netflix anyway, unfortunately.
I think all that makes sense, bringing in somebody who's a bit of to use a term, like a phrase like outsider or whatever. But what is it about her specifically? I've never talked to her. I don't know Bari Weiss, but I know people in the industry that I really respect who do know her a little bit, who have had encounters with her and have been very impressed by her. They find her very charismatic. They find her ideas to be interesting, at least. Not everybody, but like I said, a lot of people that I respect, I would even say some of them are smitten with her in terms of just her approach. What do you think it was? I don't know how well you know her, but what do you think it was about her specifically, other than being an outsider, that maybe interested Larry Ellison and have had him think she might be good in this role?
I think it's really, hard to know the exact dynamic between Ellison and Bari Weiss. I assume their personal friendship and business relationship played a heavy role in this. I don't sense that they casted about for the most qualified person for this. I think this is I know this person who seems very interesting and smart, and maybe they can do this job kind of thing. I saw her in person last week. The Free Press hosted an event in DC where she interviewed Palmer Luckey. And I think she's certainly smart and charming and interesting, and obviously has a large Rolodex, because we keep hearing about her. In morning meetings, she will bring up ideas for bookings, and tries to put together big pairings of big influential people. So it seems like her connections in the industry and her kind of connections throughout politics maybe that played a role, but it probably had to do with the idea of bringing in a younger person with a different perspective, and trying to, I have to imagine it was more about, and I'm just saying have to imagine because I don't really know what David Ellison's conversations were like with Bari Weiss. I would love to know, but I have to imagine it was more about trying to get a younger presence and someone who's built an online brand. And to me, it's always been very logical that they would really try to utilize her most with the digital product, in terms of they can't necessarily rebrand the Free Press as the CBS News Free Press, but perhaps they think that there are some learnings there that can help with their digital product. And we don't really know yet, I guess, what exactly the integration is going to be, but I have to imagine they'll try to take advantage of that opportunity or that email list or however it works to try to kind of meld those two. But I don't know her particularly well. I covered some of the turmoil at the New York Times, but I didn't anticipate, certainly, I think nobody anticipated a few years ago that she would be in this role. I think this role didn't even exist a few years ago. So it's hard to say, I didn't predict Bari Weiss to be editor-in-chief of CBS News, because I don't think that really even existed. But as you said, things are moving very quickly these days. There are changes being made that are very surprising. media news used to move a lot slower. It was a lot more predictable. And so everything is kind of up in the air at this point. So I feel like every day we wake up and there's a new potential acquisition or a new editor or a new controversy or the LA Times going public out of nowhere. I mean, just things are happening that in 2014, which I referred to as the old days, would have been much more slower and more predictable. And there would have been a long process to search for so-and-so. And things are much, and maybe that's just sort of the instability of the industry that the time has sped up. Maybe there's more urgency, but it's harder to know why anything is happening other than that the business is a bit unstable and that wealthy people who own many of the media companies have a lot of friends and go to influential gatherings and meet other influential people and make decisions seemingly about how to improve their media properties that they acquire. But I would say with the Washington Post, for example, I don't know exactly what Jeff Bezos is thinking. I don't think anyone knows what anyone is thinking, really, at this point. So I think media reporters are just trying to kind of like put some logic to it, or to try to kind of explain why things might be happening. But we don't always, even the best media reporters don't always have the inside sources to know exactly the conversations that led to certain things, unfortunately.
Right. I was a little surprised, and again, I don't know her, so maybe I shouldn't say that I'm surprised, but based on things she's said in the past, Bari Weiss, that she would even be interested in this job. I mean, she sort of seemed to be doing her really cool thing at the Free Press, had total autonomy there, could do the things that that's the one thing I heard that, and as an opinion person, she could do whatever she wanted to do. And if a topic didn't interest her, she could ignore it. I don't know that you could do that at CBS News. Are you at all surprised that she was even interested in this job, or is it just too much of an influential job to turn down?
I wasn't surprised that she's interested, because I think it's still a very big brand and a very big name. And it's also CBS News has been the most talked about media company really in the country for the last few months, maybe for better or for worse from their perspective. But it's obviously there's been a lot of interest in CBS News, certainly. And so maybe she wanted to be at the sort of the center of that cultural storm there. But I think that from what she said, I don't think that she anticipated being offered a job of this magnitude. And so, I mean, it seems like it's hard to turn down the job, other than the fact that you go into a company probably knowing that a lot of people will be rooting against you.
Yeah.
And that, CBS News has had a lot of leaders in the last 5 years between presidents and other managers, and there's been a lot of turnover. But I think what we see and what we know is that what matters most is the relationship between the executive and the and the patron, and the owner. That dynamic, that relationship between Bari Weiss and Larry Ellison and David Ellison will be very important. The relationship between Will Lewis and Jeff Bezos, relationship between, and any sort of dynamic like that, where you have a very powerful, very busy corporate leader. I think that relationship is kind of the most important one, that maybe the business results don't matter quite as much. Obviously the ratings are not going to increase, all of a sudden change and become much, much bigger. So I think it'll be more about the trust and that dynamic between the two of them, which we don't know. I assume that they'll give her plenty of time to make incremental changes and shake things up. I think we all anticipate that they're going to go back to a one anchor format for the evening news, because that show has not been super successful. I said that was something that I think that was under Wendy McMahon. So,
right.
These changes that were made under previous leaders who are then deposed, those changes are often obviously undone. But CBS News has had very, very little stability in the last few years between anchor changes, the Pelly, and then the Glore, and then the Nora O'Donnell, and then Jeff Mason did it at one point, right? There was everybody's done it for a brief period of time. Obviously, Katie Couric. I think where NBC and ABC succeeded was having one stable anchor for a very long period of time. That was obviously very helpful. for viewership. But I think that it's, if a person in my age cohort, which I think Bari is my age cohort, gets offered a chance to run one of the most storied networks in TV history, even if it's a really difficult job, sounds fun. I don't know. Sounds interesting. She's not looking for stability, I don't really think. I mean, she has a successful business. She just sold a company for a lot of money. It doesn't seem like a situation where she necessarily needs this job to like sort of to pay rent.
Right.
So I'd love to talk to her if she's listening to this, but I did text her when the sale was announced, but didn't hear back. But certainly an interesting person that we want to know more from, and to hear more about her vision. But I think it's going to it seems to be in sort of the listening tour portion of this.
You did a big story, right? She had her first editorial meeting and she came in kind of hot, where she closed out by saying, let's do the effing news. And I guess it got some eye rolls. Mm-hmm. You talked to several staffers after that meeting. I don't know how much you certainly have your finger on the pulse of what's going on there. What's been the reaction with staff? Is it kind of a wait and see, or are they kind of like folding their arms, like, she needs to prove it to them? Like, what's sort of the vibe you get from the staff?
Well, I think the first test was this email that she asked people to send by the end of the day on Tuesday, October 14th, about whether to let her know what they do and what their ideas are. And I heard from people who did send it. I heard from people who didn't send it. I think even some people that are skeptical of her did send it because, if she's claiming that this is a, good faith gesture at getting to know people, they should at least give her a shot and not assume that it's kind of an Elon Musk type situation. I mean, I know that the Guild told people they don't have to do it. But I think that, as I said, there's always going to be, I think every media company is skeptical of outsiders. Every place I've worked, I think you have to kind of prove yourself with the people who've been working there for a lot longer. I think that's got to be even more so at a place that's like CBS News. So there's a lot stacked against her. And some of the people I've talked to have worked there for a long time. So I think there's obviously skepticism. I think that some of her, comments about booking and her, sort of, let me go ahead and text Tony Blinken and Mike Pompeo and Hillary Clinton and get them on a panel. And I think that she had said by the end of the meeting that they had agreed to do it. But what ended up happening was that it was Hillary Clinton, Condoleezza Rice. And then, of course, that was aired and it didn't get that many viewers, though that's maybe not anyone's fault. There might just be not a huge audience demand for that pairing of people. So I think she's definitely exuding confidence and doing the right things in terms of listening. But I said every person who comes into a network or media company does the whole listening tour thing, and they have lots of meetings and they take everyone to lunch, and nothing has been different in terms of how a person coming into a media company would operate in terms of trying to get the lay of the land. But I think the question is where we go from here, and also this idea, also the pending layoffs and whether she's going to be involved in that. And I think that most people seem to think that maybe she'll stay away from that a little bit, and that'll be something that's done by the existing leadership and Tom Sobrowski, because I would imagine that a person coming into the TV news business for the first time would not be the right person to be able to say, we can cut back on these 3, video editors in New York because we don't need this, because we can take the feed from there. I mean, TV is incredibly complicated. I only understand it as well as people can explain it to me. So I would imagine that they won't force her to be the one to do something like that. But
I'm glad you brought up Tom Sobrowski, because it's not. I think there was a misconception from people, and maybe we're part of the problem in this, that we made it sound like Bari Weiss has total control, and so here's somebody who never has been in network news, and she's going to push the wrong buttons or do like there are other people there who can do the TV stuff, so to speak. So, but
it definitely sounds like she is the most important person in terms of the editorial, and just the way that, sort of reading the tea leaves of the memo that David Ellison sent. It sounds like Sobrowski is there to help for continuity purposes, but it doesn't sound like he's the future leader of CBS News. It sounds like she's the future leader of CBS News. But I mean, we've also seen these networks splitting up their leadership structures. in the old days of 2014, as I said, networks had like one president. But then people started splitting up the job, and then CBS News split up the job, and NBC News split up the job to 3 people. And then they had CBS News had the kind of split between Niraj Kamlani and Wendy McMahon, and then you had Ingrid, and then you had at ABC News, it's just, I think everything's gotten more complicated in terms of the leadership structure.
Right.
So there is no like one, Andy Lack or even Noah Oppenheim type figure, or I guess Fox News still has one CEO. I mean, everybody still has a CEO, but in terms of like who the news leader is, I think the networks have embraced different models of. I think NBC News, I guess, just pared theirs back a bit from 3 to 2 because they put Janelle Rodriguez under Rebecca Blumenstein. So that's now paring that back. So I don't even know if those models are working, but there definitely seemed to be a deliberate attempt to diffuse power a bit across more people than having one boss type figure.
Right. Before we leave the whole situation at CBS and Bari Weiss, I did want to ask you, look, they have 60 Minutes. I still think 60 Minutes is the gold standard of TV journalism, certainly magazine journalism. Face the Nation, we can go back and forth on whether Sunday morning shows still have any relevancy whatsoever. But if you think it does, Face the Nation, I think, is still a pretty strong show with Margaret Brennan. Certainly Mary Hager's, I think, an outstanding executive producer. But as we move forward, what are, aside from the evening news, maybe we'll see some changes there. What are there any telltale signs that you're looking for as a media reporter, observer? Okay, here's where we're going to start seeing Bari Weiss make her mark. Is there in terms of like editorial leanings or anything like that? Is there anywhere you're looking, saying this will be a telltale sign of what's coming?
I think that the people inside the network that are very focused on their coverage of Israel and Gaza are very carefully looking at the wording and the booking choices in terms of coverage of the ceasefire and the peace deal. I think that's probably the number one issue, where she's been very out and out about her support for Israel, and I think that's probably the most obvious place to look to see how they cover it, whether they represent other perspectives, or whether it's sort of primarily the Israeli government perspective, or how they cover that is the main thing. I mean, I think also with like 60 Minutes, we're looking to see how tough their coverage is of the Trump administration. To see whether they're doing. I think in the last season, 60 Minutes had pretty tough, aggressive coverage of the Trump administration. And I think people are curious to see whether that will continue as well. But we're also seeing we're looking at the elevation of various people. I think that people are looking to see whether Tony DeCopel, for example, whether he gets a bigger role. I mean, being a morning host is a big deal, obviously, but there's been speculation about him possibly being an anchor. But he was the one
was sent to Israel when the ceasefire came about. I mean, he was the guy who they put over there, which I thought was interesting.
Right. And so he clearly is in the favor of Bari Weiss. He was in the favor of Sherry Redstone, certainly. Maybe not in the favor of Wendy McMahon, because he kind of got in trouble for his interview with Ta-Nehisi Coates. But if there are certain people that seem like they're favored individuals, if they get more, bigger billings, I think that'll be interesting to see as well. But also, I think with all these different networks, the average staffer is also just focused on like whether I will be employed in 1 month from now.
Yeah.
I think with media reporting, people are always wondering, like, is everybody really upset about everything at all times? And journalists are always upset about everything at all times just by nature. But I think that people have the more immediate concern of like the cutbacks. NBC News obviously did cutbacks yesterday. So I think people are certainly skeptical of Bari. Some people are more willing to give her a chance. The veterans are the most skeptical. But also people are just wanting to know when the cuts, I think, are likely going to come at CBS News before they report earnings, which I think is in early November. So that's the next few weeks. And it could be, I think it's 100 people was the latest estimate. I don't have a number on that. But I mean, NBC News was 150, which is a pretty significant
7%
number of people. Yeah. So, I think the industry always sheds people in the winter, and I think it'll be particularly bad this year. So I think that there's just a whole smorgasbord of concerns and things to be focused on at most networks. Maybe not at Fox News, which seems to be doing totally fine, but obviously CNN could be acquired by the Ellisons. There could be a merging of, CBS and CNN, and is Barry Ellison going to take a role there? That's stressful there.
Right.
NBC News, MSNBC, and NBC News, and that split is obviously stressful. ABC, Disney certainly being under a microscope. Brendan Carr at the FCC seeming to have his eye on The View. A lot going on there. So it's just at every network there's something stressful going on right now.
Well, that's good tease. I want to talk more about some of the cable stuff going on and also what's going on at the Pentagon. So we're going to take a quick break. Stick around. We'll come back and talk more about that. Hey, everybody. If you like this podcast, can I ask you a favor? I'd love to make sure you also subscribe to the Poynter Report newsletter, where I bring you the latest news and commentary about the media industry every weekday. If you're already signed up, thanks a lot. But you should also check out some of the other great newsletters we have at poynter.org/newsletters. My colleague, Kristen Hare, focuses on the local news scene in communities all across the country every Wednesday with Local Edition. My editor, Ren LaForme, gives you the roundup of the best media stories from Poynter every Friday in his Open Tabs newsletter. And if you care about misinformation, fact-checking, getting to the truth, the Factually newsletter has you covered. And if you're looking for some great ways to improve your skills in writing, leadership, or ethics, our weekly training digest has you covered. Just go to poynter.org/newsletters and sign up today. So, Jeremy, moving on now, obviously situation at the Pentagon has really ramped up the last couple of days as we're recording this. Again, we're recording this on October the 16th. There's a new policy in place that basically prohibits journalists from accessing or soliciting information that the Defense Department doesn't make available to them. A bunch of media organizations, pretty much every media organization with the exception of OAN, which I'm not even sure qualifies as a true news outlet, signed saying they're not going to abide by this and have moved out of the Pentagon. What do you think? What was, and Pete Hegseth, obviously Secretary of Defense, former Fox News personality, what's sort of the end game here? I mean, is he worried about leaks? Is he just trying to show toughness to the press, to the president? Is he trying to show how tough he is? What was the impetus, do you think, for all this?
I have no idea. I think it's not a controversial thing to say that Pete Hegseth is very skeptical of reporters. And certainly when he was on Fox, bashing the media was one of the top things that he did. I think he has a pretty negative view of reporters. I don't think he would deny that, or he's certainly skeptical of them. And so I think every move he's made in the last few months has been trying to limit access for reporters, whether it's kicking CNN and NBC out of their booths, switching out the New York Times, bringing in more conservative outlets, closing down the briefing room for people to do stand-ups. It seems like he wants less coverage of the Pentagon or coverage that's not sort of more approved by the administration. I think the kind of coverage that he likes was when Will Cain came on to interview him, and they sort of did their whole kind of friendly dynamic in front of the Pentagon, and he sort of likes more friendly coverage, obviously. And I think that there's certainly a lot of skepticism of the more traditional outlets. And my former outlet, The Post, has done a lot of really aggressive coverage and broken a lot of stories. And I think, we've seen this with Trump as well, obviously trying to give preferential access to people like Brian Glenn and the more pro-Trump outlets. But I think that, from talking to Pentagon reporters, there were some people who were surprised because they thought that Hegseth, like Trump, would still want the coverage, that he still would want to be on TV, even if he hated the people he was talking to. Obviously, Trump, in some ways, loves the media, or loves talking to people and loves talking to John, yelling at John Carl or yelling at whoever. But it's still, he still likes to be part of the conversation. He doesn't want to cut out the TV news world or the legacy world or the Maggie Habermans of the world. So Hegseth seems to be a little bit different, where he's actually seems to be fine with people just leaving and there just being, one American news correspondent in the room. But he doesn't really do briefings, so that's not really going to show up for that. So I think the activities that reporters could do in the building were really limited by that, because there weren't briefings to go to. I know that they can go to different press rooms, or they could talk to a source who walks by, but I don't know how much utility there was, but I also don't want to speak for Pentagon reporters who've been covering this for 20 years. I think that it's symbolically a huge deal, and it's very disappointing to them. I've heard about how great the camaraderie was in the Pentagon press room, and how frustrating and upsetting this is that they're being sort of booted out because they were being forced to sign this document, which I think the Pentagon thinks is not a big deal, this document. But there were certain kind of poison pills in that agreement where I think that there were concerns about potential, being accused of criminal activity for getting a tip from a service member, and it was just a little bit too risky. So I'm curious to see how this goes, about whether, the volume of coverage, will it decrease? Will we see different kinds of coverage? I don't know why exactly Pete Hegseth feels the way he does about the media, but it seems like he and his sort of deputies are just kind of very skeptical of journalists. And, I don't know if they anticipated this, because they were negotiating with the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press and some lawyers, and they were trying to come to an agreement about a set of guidelines that people could agree to. But so they wanted people to sign it to stay, I guess. I mean, they could have just said, you guys are all out. Or they could have just closed the media room, theoretically. So they were trying to come up with some sort of agreement, but obviously they were doing so in a way in which they were trying to tamp down on leaks. They certainly, what I was told from a colleague at The Guardian is that they really don't like the social media callouts for sources, which everybody does. Saying, if you work at the Pentagon, please message me. We did this. The post was on Reddit asking for people. So many stories in the last few months have been done by social media callouts, and I think that they really didn't like that reporters were soliciting sources that way, and they were trying to basically suggest that was inducing criminal activity, which it's obviously not. That's a First Amendment protected thing to ask about for sources. So I think that this maybe is a punishment for that in some sense, that they put in this very draconian kind of rules about solicitation that made it really impossible for people to sign. But I don't actually know whether they wanted this to happen. I'd be very curious to know how they actually feel about this. Obviously, I think in public, Pete Hegseth was posting on Twitter, bye. Right. And maybe that's genuine, but you're not just losing the Washington Post, you're losing basically everybody but One America. And One America does not have that many viewers. And I'm not sure who covers them. I mean, I think they have a correspondent, but it's not a large operation, certainly. And it's not Fox News, which is, the Jennifer Griffin, who I've written about, one of the most storied correspondents. The fact that Pete's old network is out of the building too says something. And, I think obviously people should give Fox credit for that. But Fox, I think, has always been relatively aligned with the other networks on issues of access as well.
Right.
It's not what I think people sometimes get surprised by that, but I think that their Washington news presence, certainly Jennifer Griffin has the respect of all of her peers as well. So that wasn't maybe as surprising as it might seem, that like Fox is turning against the Hegseth administration. But I'm curious to see where it goes from here. But I think right now, the first, sort of the immediate mood is disappointment, but also, people I talked to were also energized to some degree to kind of prove that the in-person access was not that important. But I think also people said that certainly it's going to be harder to cover it. Sure. You just can't run into people in the same way. I mean, if you took White House reporters out of the White House, they would certainly tell you that it's not as easy to get answers for certain things. There also are outlets, I guess, that believe that you should never send people to White House briefings anyway.
Right.
So was it Jim Van Dyke who said that, or Mike Allen? There was, I think some people have said that they don't really think those are valuable anyway. So in this case, there weren't even briefings to not go to.
Right.
But, we'll see what happens. But it's certainly a very big moment. And to be, the emptying out of these rooms of people who've worked there for decades is really significant and surprising, and I guess probably unprecedented.
Yeah.
In the last, in recent history, that an entire press corps would basically be sort of cleared out of an agency.
I was, I mean, there were fears when Trump took over the White House of what his assaults on the media could look like. I don't know about you, Jeremy. I figured some of it was coming. I'm stunned at the, how much he's been able to do that. You know, basically boycotted. He's gotten the AP kicked out of certain things because they refused it to call the Gulf of America at one point. He sued networks that have basically bent to him. We've seen him through Congress get rid of public media for the most part. I don't know. Should I be surprised? Like the amount he's been able to accomplish in just 10 months, 8 months, whatever it's been.
Yeah, I don't really. It's hard to say whether to give someone credit or that they've been successful. There's still a lot of aggressive coverage of the administration. I think the Jimmy Kimmel situation. Maybe some people would say that actually kind of backfired. That was not successful. That Kimmel's back on. That Brendan Carr, did not actually succeed with what seemed to be his aim of getting the networks to continue boycotting the Kimmel show. So that may have been one step in a more pro press or pro free speech direction. But I think that Trump seems to be pressing all the different levers that media companies were worried about. But I mean, I think the AP is still in the White House. They don't get as much access certainly as they did. I mean, getting rid of the wire seat was a huge deal. If you look at like the sort of weekly schedules for White House access, the AP is not getting the best access. They're still getting, they're the secondary, the print, or sometimes they're on the weekends or the radio, but it's not what it was. But I mean, that case is still playing out, the whole AP lawsuit against the White House. But I think that certainly it's been a very difficult few months structurally for the media business. And I think that Trump and his people also know that the industry is weak in some sense, that the kind of financial difficulties are making it very challenging, that it's there's sort of been some softening of the target a little bit. And I think that they're not, that they're savvy in that regard, right. That, that CBS News is going through a merger, that NBC News is splitting off from MSNBC. There's always rumors about takeovers. There's, FCC threats. There's a lot being thrown at media companies right now. And I think that Trump is certainly aware of that.
Let's hit on a couple quickly on a couple of cable networks. MSNBC splitting off from NBC News. Mm-hmm. How big a deal is that? Are we going to, how will we notice that split, that MSNBC won't be able to rely on the news of NBC, which was right. A big deal, I thought.
Well, I hope to ask some MSNBC viewers about this, because I think that obviously people don't tune into MSNBC primarily for news. So I do wonder whether people will really notice, and they'll notice sort of the absence of certain correspondents that they're used to seeing, who kind of went to NBC News in that split. But the hosts and anchors are the same. And so if you're tuning in because you like watching a certain show, that show is not going to be changed.
Like what'll be changed is the name. Right, whatever, yeah.
Right. The name is changing. And I think that's interesting. And I went to the MSNBC live event this past Saturday in New York. I'm going to get the date. It was October 11th in Manhattan. And there was only one or two references in the morning session to the name change, but Mika Brzezinski said, you'll get used to it. But I don't think the crowd necessarily knew what she was talking about, because I think you would have to have read mostly trade publications to know that name. I mean, I guess most national outlets covered it, but I'd imagine that most people are not aware of the coming name change. And I think MSNBC probably is hoping that people don't really notice it too much, because it sounds pretty similar to the old name. There's only a few letters changed, but I don't really know exactly. I'd love to talk to MSNBC more to get a sense of whether things are actually going to be changing, or whether this was more about, obviously they're changing structurally because it's leaving the NBC Universal mothership. But I'm not actually sure if they want to redo anything. I think that it's a rebrand. They're part of this new entity, Versant. They're changing the name because they had to. They're keeping the hosts the same. I think that maybe the biggest change was building out this DC bureau. And building out a big team of journalists, including Carol Leonnig, who used to work at the Post, and Jackie Alamani, and they have a pretty big, impressive newsroom. It's not what most MSNBC viewers are primarily tuning in for, but I think that historically MSNBC has run a lot of, they featured a lot of reporters from like the New York Times presenting their scoops and talking about their scoops,
Right.
and so maybe with this new newsroom, that you won't need to bring in as many outside people. You could just bring on Carol Leonnig to talk about her scoops. And in some ways, that's beneficial for MSNBC because it shows that they have reporting muscle beyond just bringing in people from other outlets that actually have more of the reporting resources. So, the name change, I think, is happening in the next few weeks. I'll be fascinated to see how people feel about it. I think that the media insider class certainly has had a lot of feelings about the name change. But I guess if they had to change the name, they kept most of the letters. They still kept
I didn't mind it. I thought it was okay. I didn't hate it.
I think if you want a name to sound as close to MSNBC as possible, MS Now is not that bad. Because it has to be MSN, and then you got to go from there.
Right.
Obviously the M is this holdover from Microsoft.
Right.
So it'll be a branding challenge, but the channel's staying on the same number,
right.
And the people will be the same, and the name is changing a little bit. But inside industry people have always called it MS anyway,
right?
To differentiate it. I don't know if average viewers would think of it as MS. My mom has said MS, but I think primarily it's more.
Well, I'm waiting to see how Trump tries to change the name to make it to insult them in some way. I guess he'll leave it MSDNC or whatever.
But I think part of it, MSNBC, I think to some degree is more insulated from the FCC though, because they're now fully a cable company, so they're no broadcast licenses. Whereas with it, obviously when they're part of NBC Universal, there was that connection there, and they can there seemed to be some threat against Comcast and against the broader NBC licenses because of that connection. So in some ways they're insulated a bit, but I think no one these days is really insulated from anything.
That's true. Jeremy, I wanted to ask about you real quick. You were at the Washington Post for several years, and then now at The Guardian. I get the first media, I was surprised, first media U.S. writer for The Guardian. Sort of what's your plan moving forward? Like what is it you want to do with this job? I guess you could sort of carve out the way you want to do it, being the first one and all. Like what's your plan as far as media coverage?
Yeah, so I was at the Post for 5.5 years. I joined in June 2020. I was one of the first people hired during the pandemic. So it was a very interesting time to start working at the Post. I was there for the Marty Baron transition and the Sally Busby transition, and then the Robert Winnett transition, and then the Matt Murray transition. And so there's been a lot going on. But it was my hometown newspaper. I'm from the DC suburbs. I did this Washington Post development program when I was in high school. So I always wanted to work there. It's obviously an incredible organization. I did like the idea of working at a place that was a little bit smaller. The Guardian US is sort of has more of a startup culture. 100 something people. Smaller DC office. Probably will be a little bit less siloed just by virtue of it being a smaller place. The Post is still massive, different people on different floors. It would be when I wanted to cover a story that was maybe touching on the White House, I needed to go talk to all the different people that were involved, and there's different teams, and that's all changed because many of those people have left. But I think that there might be fewer, just might be a little bit easier to broaden my scope a little bit beyond just traditionally covering just media companies, because the media beat obviously has expanded beyond just writing about, Gannett, or even writing about CNN. It's writing about the FCC and writing about so much more, covering more, I think the financial focus, writing more about M&A is a big deal now. Looking at different regulators, and obviously the Trump administration is incredibly focused on the media. In 2017, I joined the Hollywood Reporter, and my job back then was to cover sort of the connection between the media and politics. And it was mostly a job. It was a job that Matt Bellany created basically because of Trump's attacks on the White House. And so in some sense, I'm kind of going back to my roots in that regard of covering that sort of the nexus between media and politics. At this job, it's media and power, which I think is a very cool word for politics. But I'm also, I'm in DC. I think this is a good opportunity to go around town and to try to meet a lot of the stakeholders. And I think I'll be able to travel a lot and, have the support to kind of to look at the beat as I want to look at it and to broaden it and to, also I want to find out what readers are interested in. The Guardian's readership is obviously it's a Guardian US, but we do write for readers abroad as well. So I'm fascinated to see what stories translate, which stories don't translate. But it seems like a place that is doing a lot of hiring, and I have some friends there. Margaret Sullivan,
Right.
my former colleague at the Post, is there. This woman, Johanna Bouillon, I worked with at Capitol New York, is there. And so there's some familiar faces, but it seems to be a lot of energy. A lot of people are optimistic about it. A good business model and sort of nice people, nice editors. So I thought it would be a good opportunity to try something a little bit different and maybe have a wider aperture, but still working for obviously a widely respected brand with a lot of readers.
Before I let you go, last question, Jeremy. I ask this of every time we have a media reporter comes on. Is there a story right now that those who cover the media isn't covering enough, or is there a story that we're completely overlooking, or any story that needs more attention? I know some people talked just a couple of weeks ago. I asked Oliver Darcy this question. He talked about the LA Times, that we should be paying more attention to what's going on at the LA Times. Is there any story out there that, without giving away future scoops or anything, is there any story that you would really like to? Do you think the media needs to pay a little more attention to right now?
I wish I had spent more time thinking about this.
No, it's okay.
I have a lot of stories on my list of things.
I don't want to give. You don't want to give away too many. I mean, although I'm always looking for newsletter fodder. So,
no, I think the New York Times, the LA Times is a good one, because I think at the Post we didn't really cover the LA Times too much, actually.
Right.
We didn't tend to cover, I guess, those more traditional sort of legacy print outlets quite as much. I think that the dynamic between the New York Times and the Trump administration, I think, is interesting. I know that the lawsuit was sort of tossed. I think it can be refiled, but the New York Times emerging as sort of the primary outlet sort of standing up to the Trump administration, I think is interesting. Which I guess they played that role before, but I feel like in the first few months in Trump administration, the statements that they made were certainly the strongest and most toughly worded. They're defending themselves constantly on Twitter about their stories. That really aggressive approach, I think, is something I've wanted to write about, because as you've seen some other outlets that don't give as many statements, or not trying to to draw the ire of the administration too much. I think that the Times has sort of embraced that role, and they've said that of course they're not going to settle the lawsuit. So amid a lot of settlements, I think everybody wants to settle lawsuits right now. So I think when you look at the companies that are dead set on fighting lawsuits, that's always interesting. But I'm still I'd say the FCC gets plenty of coverage, but I do think that some of the veiled threats against networks like ABC, I'm really watching to see what happens with The View. I really think that there seems to be a chance that there could be, a news distortion complaint against ABC. Brendan Carr has talked about looking back at some standards. I think if there's more action against TV networks, that'll be really interesting to see, this 39% ownership cap issue, and whether they officially change the rules on how many stations that you can own in one market, or own in general. That's really important. And that's a story that sort of an industry story that has national implications. So I've given you.
I was going to say, for having not thought about it, you gave me some good ones.
So I copied Oliver. Oliver's done the best coverage of the LA Times, and I really respect that Oliver is so committed to that story, because somebody needs to cover the LA Times, because it's a huge outlet.
It is.
And I have no idea what's going on over there. I don't know why they're doing an IPO. I don't know what Patrick Soon-Chung's situation is. Seeing him on podcasts that are like a bit conspiratorial is quite interesting. And so that's an interesting story too. But I do hope to take advantage of my proximity to the FCC here to try to get a better sense of what's going on there and whether we could see more Kimmel-gate situations.
Right.
What happens with NBC, what happens with, I think that the NBC late night hosts are fine for now, but, things change. And I didn't anticipate that Kimmel would come back as soon as he did. I saw people who were really smart saying that Kimmel was never coming back. And then he did come back. So we have no idea what's going to go on, essentially. But it does seem like, if you work at a broadcast network and you have FCC licenses, it's a stressful time, particularly when you're in the business of satirizing as they do. Though I guess, Jimmy Fallon has talked about not mocking the administration, staying out of it. But I think that'll be interesting to watch as well.
Good stuff. Jeremy Barr, thanks so much for joining us. You can read him in The Guardian and also you're all over social media. So thanks for you. We'll have to have you back. Thanks so much for doing this.
Sounds good. Yep. Happy to do it.
And thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Go back and check out some of our more recent episodes. We talked to Chuck Todd, Oliver Darcy. We had Karen Attia, former Washington Post opinion writer, talking about how she was fired recently for her social media posts. Go back and check those out. And also, if you like what you see, you like what you hear, give us a good review. It really helps us out. And subscribe to us on YouTube. That also would help out a bunch. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on the Poynter Report Podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Poynter Report Podcast. The views and opinions of this episode's guest and the host are not associated with nor reflect those of the University of South Florida. The podcast is produced by the Department of Journalism and Digital Communication at the University of South Florida, St. Petersburg. Executive producers are Elliot Weiser and Ren LaForme. Our producers are Tom Jones and Caden Knowles. Production assistant is Ariel Menkes, and our director is Christopher Campbell. And a special thank you to Neil Brown and Dr. Mark Walters.